We're here to talk about Silicon Valley real estate marketplace, which is Santa Clara County, San Mateo County, and Alameda County. I'm Richard Calhoun, Creekside Realty, working with buyers and sellers since 1981. Happy to talk to you about your real estate needs. If you're a repeat viewer, you may want to skip to the first data slide. First time or infrequent viewers may want to go through this introduction for a recap. Some of the unique features of my data is I focus on 20 different micro markets within Silicon Valley. I then look at the impact of Northern California on Silicon Valley. I use a 5-week moving period instead of monthly data to eliminate the impacts of the number of each weekday in that given month. On my active listings, I look at only active listings with no underlying contract. I don't look at pending continue to sell or contingent offers that already have an offer on them. I look at offers accepted versus pendings. The reason for that, pendings is impacted by the duration of the escrows. Some properties are influence the data for a long period of time and others don't, where if you look at offers accepted, the offers accepted one time and that's all the impact it has. I introduce days of unsold inventory. That's the speed of the market turnover. It's how quickly all the inventory would sell at the existing rate of sales. Instead of looking at the median or the average days on marketplace, I look at the 75th percentile. For the seller, I look at their ask price reductions. How large of price reductions are they doing, and what percentage of sellers are doing those price reductions, and what's the distribution? I then flip that over and look at the buyers. What are buyers doing with overbidding? How much are they overbidding? How frequently are they overbidding, and what's their distribution? I then look at long-term appreciation. Long-term appreciation is since the last 9 months of 2015. So there's a lot of differences. My focus is to try to make it usable data to understand the local real estate marketplace. This is our first data slide. What it's doing is it's comparing the active listings compared to the 10-year median. Look at how many listings are available on this week every year for the last 10 years. Look at what the median of those 10 years, and then I look at a ratio. You can see that where most of the areas, except for along the peninsula, basically has a shortage of inventory. The peninsula is basically on both sides of 100% or normal. A shortage of active listings favors the seller because there's less competition, making it easier to sell their property. Now we flip over and look at the buyers, and we look at what's the number of offers being accepted compared to the same period of time for the last 10 years, the median. And you can see that most of the areas are, say, right around 60%. Yes, there are some areas that are down at 50, and there's some areas at 100% of normal. There's also some unusualities where the expensive areas in the San Mateo County are seeing 100% of their offers accepted. Here's the days of unsold inventory. This was a term that I introduced many years back, about 1997. And what it does is it looks at how many active listings you have now and how many sales have you had in the last 5 weeks, and how long would it take to sell out the inventory. And then I compare that number for the past 10 years to the current number. And you can see for the most part, the valley is right around 100%. Yes, Alameda County is at 88%, and some of the areas in San Mateo County up on the peninsula are closer to 150%. But Santa Clara County is very close to 100%, which is basically a normal speed of the marketplace, which, unfortunately for buyers, is a fairly fast-moving marketplace. Here's the first time we get into actual just raw numbers. And the reason we have to compare at least active inventory and offers to the 10-year median is the micromarket areas are based on similar properties, not similar size. So it's hard to tell, is 50 listings a lot in one micromarket area? It could be a shortage in another micromarket area based on their size. Days of unsold inventory takes the ratio between active listings and offers, and therefore the size of that area is irrelevant, although small areas like Foster City and Redwood Shores gets to be statistically a lot of bounce because it's a fairly small micromarket area, and therefore you have statistical fluctuation. This is the rate of speed of which you would sell, and you can see that Santa Clara County, the heart of Santa Clara County, would basically sell out in 3 weeks. The South County and the affordable areas in East San Jose and South San Jose and Central San Jose would sell out in just over 3 weeks, but then you start getting up into the peninsula and you're 70 to 120 days to sell out your inventory. You jump over to Alameda County, and that number is basically somewhere from about 21 days up to about 35. But then you also have the more affordable areas in Oakland, San Leandro, Hayward, and Berkeley and Alameda. And those, the last two aren't necessarily affordable, more around 50 days of unsold inventory. So a much slower marketplace. So you can see that the speed that a buyer would see will vary depending on the area they're looking in. This is now a very easy to understand metric. It's the 75th percentile days on marketplace. What this number is doing is reflecting the long typical sell, or how long is it taking to sell. You can see some areas, again, are 50 days. A lot of Santa Clara County is basically at 3 weeks. You go up into San Mateo County, and that number is basically 6 to 7 to 8 weeks. And you go back down to Alameda County, and that number is maybe around 5 weeks. The color code is the longer the time on the marketplace for this long typical seller, the bluer the color, the shorter the time frame, the redder the color. And the scale has recently changed. I now, based on what we're sort of experienced, basically under 3 days is what I consider to be a seller's marketplace. Above 6 weeks is what I consider to be a buyer's marketplace, or a long time on the market. Now we're looking at the seller's ask price reductions. This is very useful and is a leading indicator because it shows what the seller's expectations were when they came on the marketplace compared to what the reality of the market was. And if a lot of sellers are reducing their price, that indicates that the sellers were overestimating the market, likely because the market has done a downturn. And you can see a lot of the areas on the peninsula are a very large number, up at 5%. And again, I recently changed the scale on this based on my experience, from a 0.5% increase. And yes, sellers increase. In fact, you can see right now in Campbell, Cambrian, Willow Glen, and Santa Clara, sellers are almost raising their price a full percent. In Fremont, it's 0.1%. It's pretty hard to raise the price because most sellers come on the marketplace, they get the offers right away, and boom. So these are sellers that came on the marketplace, got swamped, and raised their price to try to control the number of buyers that were coming into their property. From a 0.5% increase to a 0.25% reduction is what I consider to be the red hot sellers marketplace. From a 0.25% to 1% is a balanced marketplace. That's why there's no color for the first 3 micro-market areas in Santa Clara County, is that's in that range where I consider it to be a balanced marketplace. Then from 1% to 5% reduction, which is most of Alameda County and most of San Mateo County, the exact amount, of course, varies, is blue in color because those are fairly significant reductions. The huge advantage of this is you're seeing what the sellers are doing to entice the offer to come in, and you don't have to wait for that escrow to close. This is the frequency of price reductions. So how common are the price reductions? The more frequent they are, the slower the marketplace is. You can see that some areas in Santa Clara County, like Cupertino, Sunnyvale, only 3.5% of the sellers are reducing their price at all. Now, these could be very small or very large price reductions. But then you flip over and you can see in South County, 24, almost 25% of the sellers are reducing their price. That's 1 out of 4 sellers. You go into San Mateo County and it's 1 out of 3 in Redwood City to 1 out of 2 on the San Mateo County coast. You can see there is quite a bit of fluctuation on how common it is for sellers to reduce their price. This now is flipping over and looking at what the buyers are doing. How much over are their offers? And you can see in Santa Clara County, it's maybe 3.5% to 4%. And, I'm just using ballpark numbers. Down in Alameda County, maybe 1.5% to 5%, except for Oakland and Berkeley. And it's sort of interesting that Oakland and Berkeley were some of those areas that were having long marketing times, but yet Berkeley, for example, is having 12.5% overbids, which doesn't necessarily compute. And you have to get into the individual transaction to figure out what's going on. But the San Mateo County coast makes a little bit more sense. It has long marketing time, and the magnitude of overbidding is a negative 4.6%. So that means on average, the buyers are coming in almost 5% below the seller's asking price. Here's the frequency of overbidding. And since we were just talking about the coast, you can see that only 28% of the transactions are getting overbid. And in the expensive areas, it's 21%, which is more favoring the buyers. There's less frequent overbidding, and that's why it's bluer in color. But then you drop down to Fremont, where you have almost 73% of the sellers getting overbids, or up into Berkeley and Alameda, where almost 80% of the sellers are getting overbid. You can see the variation is quite a bit. Here's that long-term appreciation that I mentioned. And basically here, color is basically the areas that have the most appreciation. You can see there's a lot of areas in Silicon Valley, Santa Clara County that are up around 3/4% appreciation. But then there's also a fair number of areas that are down here under 50% appreciation, as well as most of San Mateo County is under 50%. You can really see it graphically here on the west side, the blue in color, which means the least appreciation. The pink in color is sort of a moderate appreciation, and then the red has the most appreciation. Basically, what you're doing is almost seeing a migration away from the heart of Silicon Valley, of being along the peninsula, into the more outlying areas that were more affordable, in large part, I believe, based on COVID. Here, instead of following just the median sold price, which is the middle number, I sandwich it by looking at the lowest 10% sold price as well as the highest 90% sold price. So you know that 80% of the homes are between those outlying numbers. So you can quickly figure out what area is affordable for you. And here, color is based on price. The most expensive area are the expensive areas in San Mateo County, such as Atherton, Menlo Park, Portola Valley, and Woodside. And then you basically can see you come down Los Altos, Palo Alto, Saratoga, Cupertino, Sunnyvale, and then you start getting to have ties like with Campbell and Redwood City. And that is interesting because Redwood City used to be more expensive than Campbell. Here's a summary of the tables we went in. You can start over here on the individual micro market area and look across and see what your conditions are, or you can start over here and here's the payment as well as the price. If you know what you can qualify for on a purchase price from your lender, boom, you can come here and figure out what regions are in your affordability area. Or if you have a monthly budget that you're comfortable with, you can look at what your PITI total payment is going to be in the different areas, not only the median number, but the 10%, the cheapest. In South County, you can get a house for under $7,000 a month, not fairly easily, but 1 in 10 homes has a payment of under $7,000. And that assumes a 20% down payment, 80% loan, and also using the national jumbo money loan interest rate. And you can do better than that, especially if you have stock assets or something like that and can get into relationship banking pricing. Here we're looking at Silicon Valley all in a blender. We're looking at the 3 key components: inventory in the purple, offers in the orange, and days of unsold inventory in the gray. Active inventory is the purple line, and you're basically somewhere around 74% of the inventory you'd expect to be. Now you move over and you look at your offers accepted. That's somewhere around 68% of the offers that you would expect to have. And then you come up here and look at days on the inventory, the speed of the marketplace, and that's right around 95% of the speed you would expect. So slightly slower than you expect, and that's because offers are below the active listings. That would tend to slow it down. Now, the reason this isn't above 100% is I look at each of these variables independently. So the median days of unsold inventory, the median days of offers, and the median inventory all could happen in different years. If they were all happening in the same year, then the ratios should work out. Here we're looking at basically the bottom line. One of the things that I've been commenting on for a long time is the record low number of transactions we're having. In all the years in 2023 and now into 2024, these bottom 2 lines, when it's the deep blue, that's the lowest out of the last 25 years. When it's the pale blue, it's the second worst out of the last 25 years. And in 3 of these years, you can see it was just the year before. So you can see the numbers are fairly close together. When it's white in color, it's the 3rd worst or less. And so you can see, in fact, both of them are the 3rd least number. My point is basically we're not having the volume of transactions that we are used to. We're basically at record low volumes of transactions compared to the past 25 years. Now we're looking at the estimated payments over time. You can see that the payments, this is the cheapest home you'd expect to be able to buy in Silicon Valley. This is the typical home you'd expect to buy in Silicon Valley, and this is the most expensive. To me, it's noteworthy that the payments right now for the typical home are down here just over $10,000, which is basically where they were for part of 2022 when the market was crashing downwards. Now, granted, it's still significantly higher than in 2021 and 2020, but the number has come down quite a bit from the peak. So you would expect activity, the number of transactions to pick up, but we don't have the inventory, especially at this time of the year. Now we're looking at the ask price reductions that the sellers have taken. Each line on here is a weekly distribution. We start off a year ago and we jump roughly a month at a time, which is going to be 4 or 5 weeks to try to keep it close to the 10th. The reason my numbers don't line up here is I use a real estate fiscal year. I start on March the 1st, because if you think about it, we have 365 days in a typical year, 366 in a leap year, 364 would be an even number of weeks. One discontinuity we have is on March 29th every 4 years. So I moved the discontinuity to be at the same time of every year. So March 1st is my benchmark. I move forward every 7 days. It turns out to be it's January 3rd and January 10th. To give you data up to date, I'm reporting data from midnight last night, which would have been the 5th. I report that today on the 6th. I report it though on the 10th because that's my normal weekly number. Dotted blue line, the dotted line, not the dashed line, is where we were essentially a year ago this coming Tuesday. And then what we're doing is we're going to step through, we're going to jump through a month at a time, and you can see the rise up last year. Then at 3 months, we're going to jump from monthly to weekly. There's the 12 weeks, 11 weeks, 10 weeks, and you can see the trend. And there's basically the bottom of the plateau for the year, and we're bouncing around. And now we're going to start going up. And I would expect to go up along this line more or less. That line may be skewed a little bit to horizontal. It might supposed to be a little steeper going sort of through the 45-degree axis. It was just a guess of what I thought the line was, but seeing this, I think it should probably be a little steeper. Here you can see on my offers, this is overbid. My movement line is definitely steeper. I'm looking for basically the perpendicular to the bulk of this line area here. So I think that's close to the perpendicular. And again, the concept's the same. We're starting off a year ago. We're jumping through a month at a time. And then when we get to 3 months, we jump to weekly. So there's sort of the peak of the market. Now you're sort of moving down slowly, much more stable than the seller ask price reduction. And now we're probably not quite at the bottom because there's a 5-week lag time between the offers accepted and the closings, and I need the closings to get overbidding. The bottom of the marketplace is basically right about now. So the bottom of the overbidding isn't going to show up for about another 5 weeks. One of the things you have to watch for is sometimes the anticipated increase of the 2024 is pulled into the last couple weeks of 2023. Now we're looking at the inventory by itself, the purple line, and we're comparing it to typical. Here, the red is the least inventory you'd expect. The gray line is the inventory you'd expect based on the past 10 years. And the blue line is the most inventory you'd expect. Blue for the most inventory because a lot of inventory favors the buyer. You can see we're following basically right on the behavior you'd expect the market to be for having low inventory. Here's that inventory. I took those wavy lines and straightened them out. So now you can see where you're above and below. You can see that we were getting more inventory up until maybe about 6 weeks ago, and then we started to decrease. That way you can see that we're right now maybe about 73% of the inventory you'd expect to have. Here's the same concept with the number of offers. Now here, the number of offers were right on top of the blue line, so we're having the least number of offers that you would expect to have, because your expectations are you're somewhere in, at least my expectations are you're somewhere in that 80% range, which is from the 10 percentile to the 90 percentile. And right here, you're right at the 10 percentile. Yes, you do go below the 10 percentile at times because it's not the minimum. It's not the 0 percentile. And you also go above it at times. Right now, we have fewer offers accepted than you would expect. A lot of offers being accepted would be a hot marketplace, and therefore that's why it's the red line on top. Here again, I now took those curvy lines and stretched them out, and you can see the market change. Here you can see that the offers have been basically running right around 70% with some fluctuations. Now we're doing the same thing on days on sold inventory. Because we have a lack of inventory and we have a lack of offers, Your speed of the marketplace is basically very similar to the typical marketplace. Yes, you can see earlier this year that it was almost down to the red line, but that was just a short-lived period of time. I also want to reinforce that my scale goes all the way back to 2014 and to the beginning of 2023. The scale is condensed so you can see the lines. That gives me the room to blow it out here so you can see little trends. The quarter lines here are basically twice as wide as they are here. But do keep that in mind if you're looking at the slope of the lines. But I'm doing that because I think most people are going to be looking at how this is comparing to normal, and I want to give you the history so you can see the huge cycle that we typically go through here in Silicon Valley, and then you can see how that cycle is comparing to typical. Here again, I've stretched out those curved lines, and where's the DUI? The DUI right now has been basically at 90%. It did a huge slowdown, getting up to 10% above where it typically is, and then it's accelerated again. You can see that it's a fairly narrow bandwidth, but you can see there's periods of time when you're much slower than normal and periods of time in 2021 when we were much faster than normal. And you can see the COVID slowdown here, and then you can see the slowdown in 2022. Here now is simply looking at the long typical seller, what they're taking to sell their property. Right now, the long typical seller is taking roughly, 32 days, maybe something like that. Typical's up here just over 40 days. So you're below the typical, favoring the seller with a quicker marketing time. Here's the line stretched out, so you can see that you're only at about 78% of the marketing time you'd expect. You can see just earlier in 2023, we were at 140%. We're basically almost twice as fast compared to the normal cycle. In my opinion, you really have to compare to everything to normal, and it's the change here where the market was accelerating, and here's the market in 2022 when it was slowing down. So it's all the same data. I'm just presenting it in different ways, and you probably want to focus on the way that makes the most sense visually for you to see the data. Here's the average ask price reductions. The sellers are actually taking larger price reductions than they typically do. Typically, you'd expect it to be up here just over 99%, and right now you're probably about 98.6. So not a huge change, but look, you have to keep in mind that in a hot marketplace, the sellers are taking maybe a 10% price reduction, and in a cool marketplace, they're only taking a 2%. Your total range is only 1.9%. This range from 99.1 down to maybe 98.6, so 0.5% range is 25% of the total range. So you do have to do it. And that's why this, in my opinion, is easier for a lot of people to understand. If you're having the typical price reductions, you'd be right on the gray line on the horizontal. We're down here, so you're having some of the most price reductions you'd expect, and being blue in color, it favors the buyer. I picked blue, sort of a cool buyer's marketplace, a hot seller's marketplace. Now, because that's such a tight marketplace, instead of looking at the average price reduction, I've decided to look at the sellers that are taking the biggest 10% price reduction. How much of a price reduction are they taking? Right now, you can see that the sellers that are taking the largest 10% of price reductions are taking about a 15% price reduction and just about 85%, very close to the largest percentage discount. You'd expect a discount of about 12%. Your discount right now is running about 15%. And even in a hot marketplace, you expect the sellers that are taking the biggest price reduction to be taking a 10% price reduction. And to some degree, that makes sense. If 10% of the sellers are taking a 10% price reduction and the other 90% are taking no price reduction at all, that works out to be a 1% price reduction, which was the 99 that we saw in the previous graph. Here are the price reductions stretched out, and I'm just noticing I have my colors reversed because sellers taking 20% more than their typical price reduction is not a good seller's marketplace. So this red line should be blue and this blue line should be red. Here we're looking at the frequency of price reductions, so how common are the price reductions. Here you can see that the data in the purple on all these slides is right on top of typical. It's typical for 20% of the sellers to be doing price reductions. That's exactly what we're having right now. Even though they're taking larger price reductions, they're taking them at the normal frequency. And again, here's the same thing. You can see we're right at 100%. You can see that earlier, basically halfway through third quarter, sellers were down, only taking 75% of the price reductions they normally take. Then they got up here to 100%, overshot it a little bit, and now we're returning. Hard to tell what the future brings, but you're basically expect to be close to the gray line. You can see there's obviously big changes. When do those big changes happen? When the market changes. It's interesting to note that here, halfway through first quarter of 2022, which would be right about the middle of February, sellers started taking more frequent price reductions, which most people didn't perceive the market changing until April, May. Those that were really on top of it, maybe March. But this indicates the market actually changed right around middle of February of 2022. And if I'm not mistaken, that was basically the time that Russia started invading or threatening to invade Ukraine, and then they invaded later in February. Here's the average overbid. So how much are the buyers overbidding? And you can see that right now buyers are coming in right typically where they do it, just under 104%, so a 4% overbid. In a hot marketplace, that would be up around 9%. In a cool marketplace, that would be down around 1% overbid. Right now, we're just under 4%. Here's the same information brought out. Now here you can see the lag time on the buyers in 2022, which is right here. The buyers didn't start really peaking out until beginning of second quarter. So a full 45 days later, then the sellers started taking the more frequent price reductions. So that's one of the reasons I introduced what the sellers were doing, is it appears to be a very leading indicator. The sellers seem to be more on top of what the market's doing than the buyers, and that may be the sellers are seeing how many offers they're getting or not getting on their listing, where buyers just know there's multiple offers, they don't know how many, and they don't know the distribution of the pricing of those offers. Here's the frequency of overbidding. Again, you can see that we're right on typical overbidding. In a cool marketplace, it's down around 42% maybe. In a typical marketplace, it's maybe right around 55, and in a hot marketplace, it's up here around 75. Here's the same information just stretched out. So you can see that we came down. We were having less frequent overbidding at the beginning of 2023. All through 2023, the frequency of overbidding increased. And then basically, or halfway through fourth quarter, the frequency of overbidding returned back to normal. Here's that long-term appreciation, basically a freehand line. You can see at the end of every year, the prices do tend to come down. I believe that's based on who's buying the homes. And yes, you probably could argue that this horizontal line should be up higher. I just been a little conservative. You can see the trend of pricing. This downward trend is the same downward trend that you have at the end of every year. And even here, when we were in a very heated marketplace, the downtrend is the fact that the price increases leveled off. Here's looking at the active listings. So now we're going through the same slides. We're looking at the three counties, being Santa Clara County in the blue, San Mateo County in the orange, and Alameda County in the gray. You can see what active inventory is doing. You can see that San Mateo County is a much smaller county, and you can see the huge shortage in Alameda County and Santa Clara County, because typically you're going to be some number, up here around 1,200 maybe. And even at the low time of the year, which is what we are now, you're going to be at some number around 800, and yet now we're both sub 400. So you have half the inventory you'd expect in rough numbers. Offers accepted. Again, you can see the huge decrease in offers. Here you get the huge decrease in offers in San Mateo County. But again, you have to be a little careful because you're right at the bottom of the peak. And so the decrease really is pretty minimum, because you're normally down here around 200, and now you might be at 175. In Alameda County, the decrease, may be a little bit more, because maybe you're supposed to be up here about 450, 475, and maybe the number you're at is 350. Percentage-wise, it looks like Alameda County and Santa Clara County are doing a bigger reduction than San Mateo County. It could just be the percentage, because that's on regular paper versus log paper. Here's the days of unsold inventory. So now you can see that San Mateo County is the slowest marketplace, followed by Alameda County, and then Santa Clara County has the fastest market. Within the fast-paced Silicon Valley, you can see there's quite a difference, because Silicon Valley is going to have a 30 days of unsold inventory, where San Mateo County is 50. That's a fairly significant change. In fact, my long-term benchmark is 40. Silicon Valley is actually in a hot seller's marketplace, where at 50, San Mateo County would be in a balanced marketplace. Here's that time on the marketplace, and again, it reflects the same information. Santa Clara County is the fastest at just over 30 days, maybe 33 days of time to sell the marketplace for the long typical seller. Alameda County might be around 43 days, and San Mateo County is up here somewhere around 65 days. So you can see the trend is up, but notice the trend is up every single year. And then boom, look at what happens right around the middle of January. The number comes plummeting down. This particular number is very seasonally cycled. You can see how dramatically it cycles. And the reason for that is right now there's very little inventory. The inventory that's available probably has been on the market for a while, because most people don't put their home on the market on Christmas or Hanukkah and those kinds of holidays. Holidays have a huge impact on real estate. And so they wait until the holidays are over and they start flooding the marketplace in middle of January. That is when those homes come on the marketplace. They're the fresh inventory. They're what most buyers are going to be looking at. They're the properties that are most likely to sell. They haven't been on the market very long, so days on market drops down dramatically, and that's why it's such a huge cycle. Magnitude of list price reductions. You can see that San Mateo County is doing the most. Alameda County is not far behind, surprisingly, for the better conditions, and Santa Clara County is doing the best at around only 0.5% reductions. Here's the frequency. San Mateo County is doing the most frequent price reductions, followed by Alameda, and Santa Clara County is the slowest. So quite common theme here is Santa Clara County is doing the best and San Mateo County is doing the worst within Silicon Valley. Here's the frequency of overbidding. San Mateo County, the least. Now this is actually interesting, because I had just said you'd expect this to be Alameda County, but yet it's Santa Clara. Even though Santa Clara County is moving faster, the overbidding percentage is less. Santa Clara County is overbidding only about 3%, where in Alameda County, they're overbidding 5%. So they're overbidding more even in a slower marketplace. And again, that's one of the reasons why I look at so much data. Here's your frequency of overbidding. San Mateo County is the least frequent to overbidding at just around 43%, maybe even 42.5%, followed by Santa Clara County. So these two numbers, two graphs data is consistent at 45 or 55, and then Alameda County at somewhere around 61% of the sellers are getting more than their asking price. And that extra frequency of overbidding could really help out Alameda County getting the higher overbidding. Here's that long-term appreciation. San Mateo County doing the least. Alameda County now is back in second place, and Santa Clara has the highest appreciation. You can still see it's significantly lower than it was in 2022 for all three counties. Clearly, if someone purchased here, you would expect them to be upside down. Now, you can't use this for property values because the types of properties that are being sold now could be different. So this is not necessarily a direct one-to-one comparison for market value, although it's a strong indicator. Now we're looking at median sold price, and here the real interesting thing is Santa Clara County has a more expensive median sold price than San Mateo, and that typically doesn't happen. In fact, the first time it got real close a couple times earlier in 2023, and the first time that it flipped recently is right here, almost the 2/3 of the way through fourth quarter. I do believe it flipped in one or two of these close ranges here. It's too close together to tell. But now Santa Clara County is more expensive than San Mateo County. Here's the same information on regular paper for those that prefer. The previous was log paper. And now you're looking at payments, and because the payments go through the same formula, Santa Clara County has higher payments than San Mateo County. Here's the actual raw numbers. You can look at Santa Clara County, San Mateo, and Alameda individually, or you can look at Silicon Valley as a whole. The number of new listings for the last week is actually still coming down. Now that number's probably going to turn around, maybe not next week, because remember, we're going back 5 weeks in time to get statistically stable data. The number of active listings is already increasing, and that will probably continue to increase. But this lets you look at the data that you're particularly interested in. Now we're leaving Silicon Valley, not completely, We're just lumping what we've been looking at in detail into Silicon Valley. And then we're comparing Silicon Valley to the cities, San Francisco and Marin, North Bay, Sonoma, Napa, Solano, and Contra Costa, the Central Valley, San Joaquin, and Sacramento, and the Central Coast being Santa Cruz and Monterey. We're going to reverse slide. So here's the numbers. Since we were just looking at numbers, you can pick the region for Silicon Valley and then the individual micro markets. I didn't put the total for each one of the regions, but you can see the individual counties within the region. I did put in the Bay Area, which is the 9 counties that touch the Bay, because that's so commonly used in the media. And then you have the Central Valley and Central Coast. Here's the actual data plotted out. So now you can start seeing the active inventory for the different regions. And the advantage of this is if one area outlying, say Central Valley, starts getting a lot of inventory buildup, that's an impact Santa Clara County and Silicon Valley in general. Here's the number of offers accepted, and you can see the trend, and here Silicon Valley is normally near the top of the 3, and all 3 are close together. But right now you can see Silicon Valley is the lowest out of the 3, but you can also see that it looks like it does that every year. So it crosses over. That's why it's so important to have this data going back in time and why I expanded the recent data. Here's looking for days on sold inventory. You can see that Silicon Valley is the fastest marketplace at just under 40 days. You go down to the Central Coast and you're over 80 days. Not only is there a huge change within Silicon Valley, with Santa Clara County being the fastest, and if I'm remembering correctly, right around 30, and San Mateo County being around 60, they come in and balance out at 40. There's also a huge change between Silicon Valley and Central Coast. You go over to Santa Cruz, for example, and the marketplace is completely different than it is on this side of the Los Gatos Santa Cruz Mountains. Here's your time on the marketplace. And again, you can see Silicon Valley has the fastest time on the marketplace, the least amount of time for the long typical seller. And the cities, San Francisco and Marin, has the most. And if you look back here, you might say that it's typically the Central Coast. So the fact that the cities, which is normally here, historically balanced somewhere in the middle, and basically only since the pandemic has it sort of risen to the top. To me, it says that the San Francisco Marin area has been more negatively impacted by the pandemic than the other 4 regions that I'm following. Here's the ask price reductions. And again, here you can see that San Francisco and Marin are taking the biggest price reductions. Typically, Santa Cruz is taking the biggest, the Central Coast. And you can see historically that's in the bottom. And Silicon Valley is normally on the top, and it is. So you can see changes in long-term patterns when you look at historical data plotted out. This is the frequency. The most frequent reductions are in the cities. Then you have a whole bunch together, and the least frequent reductions is Silicon Valley. Not only is the Bay Area unique, within the Bay Area, it's telling you that Silicon Valley is very unique. Here is the overbids. This is where buyers come in, and this is the magnitude of overbidding. So the most overbidding in Silicon Valley, then in the cities. Even though the cities has been doing the worst in several categories, this category on overbidding percentage is coming in second, and the Central Coast is coming in the worst. If you look at this, the only really change here is San Francisco and the cities and Silicon Valley have changed. Normally the cities had more overbidding. You come up here to COVID, they're right on top of one another. And in recent time frame, Silicon Valley has been outperforming the cities. You can see the impact when it happened, and it consistently comes back here to basically right at the pandemic and shelter in place. This is not so clear, but here you might say that the cities and Silicon Valley are very close together, but now all of a sudden Silicon Valley pulls away from the cities. Again, that's a reversal. The other areas have been pretty similar, but now also start looking at Central Valley. Central Valley has sort of pulled away from Central Coast and is getting close to the North Bay. You come back here and there's a fair amount of vertical separation between the North Bay and the Central Valley. You come here and they're on top of one another. What I believe is happening is people are moving out to the Central Valley because of affordability and not needing to commute into work as often. Here's the long-term appreciation, and you can see that absolutely worst is the cities and absolutely best Central Valley. And then the other three regions are pretty close together, although Silicon Valley is in second place, followed by North Bay and Central Coast. The big takeaways are the cities are doing the least well, and the Central Valley is doing the best out of all five regions. Here's what the price are. So the Central Valley is the most affordable. The cities is still more expensive than Silicon Valley, but remember that Santa Clara County is more expensive now than San Mateo County. Here are the payments. They're going to be in the same order because it's the same formula applied to all five regions. We've been talking about Silicon Valley. This is what I call my root URL. That takes you to the YouTube archive. You add in 2024, the year, Saturday morning, 9 o'clock, and you get to this live presentation. If you add in H for handout, the year, month, date code, you'll get the handout slide. It's the slides that we've been going over. And then a particular episode, you put in the year, month, date code. Most of these, if you wanted to go back in time and look at one, it would be 2023. Hope to see people next week. Thanks for joining. Take care.